Hello everyone. In this video, we'll be covering the useEffect hook, which is one of the two most important hooks out there. In React, hooks follow a naming convention and they start with the word use. The useEffect hook allows us to perform side effects in our components, hence the name useEffect. Some examples of effects are fetching data, which means making an API call to a backend server, updating the DOM, etc. The useEffect hook is triggered every time a component renders. The first time we load a page, our component renders. Our component also renders when we change a state inside our component. Let's see the useEffect hook in action. First, we need to import useEffect from React, and then inside of useEffect, we pass a callback function. Let's just console log the word rendered. So I've already told you that useEffect gets triggered once our component renders. And the first time we refresh our page, our component renders. So what this block of code will do is that it will print the word rendered once in our console. So let's see what happens if I go to my browser and right click and then hit inspect, and I will now refresh the page. Okay, so we can see the word rendered twice. The reason is that we are using strict mode in our index.js. So if I remove this, let's just remove this and hit save. Now if I refresh the page, you can see rendered only once. Doing this is not recommended, but I'm just doing it for understanding. So what happened is that once I refresh the page, our component got rendered and we can see the word rendered in our console. Our count text and the increment button can be hard for you to see on the browser because it's on the left edge. So I will now add some CSS to make it on the center. So back in the code, inside the source folder, I will add another file called changingstates.css. CSS. And then I will import this file inside changingstates.js. So import CSS, and so it already has a class name of count. Let's just count, then inside of it, let's make the text align center, and let's increase the font size to 20 pixel. Let's see what we have achieved. All right, this is good enough. Back in the changingstates.js, we have attached a on-click event to our increment button, and whenever we're pressing the increment button, it will trigger a function called countup. And what this countup function does is that it changes our count state. It increases it by 1. I've already told you that useEffect gets triggered when our component is rendered, and our component is rendered every time we change our state. So back in the browser, if I press increment, you can see that we are getting the word rendered. That's because our component is rendering. A useEffect can get quite ugly if not handled properly. Back in our code, I would like to copy this setCount inside of the useEffect hook, and let's visit the browser. You can see the value of count is increasing indefinitely, and we can also see a warning in the console. So let's analyze our code. What's happening is that I've already told you that useEffect gets triggered the first time our component renders. Okay, so if I refresh the page, our component rendered and we have triggered this useEffect. And this use effect has increased the value of count by 1. Thus, it changed the count state, and a state change triggered this use effect again, because when a state changes, it renders the component again, and when a component is rendered, our use effect gets triggered. And when our use effect gets triggered, this set count is triggered once again, thus changing a state which rendered the component again and which triggered the use effect once again. To prevent this, useEffect has a second argument, and it is an array. So right after the callback function, let's just make it empty. And when the array is empty, this means that execute this code only the first time the component renders. So if I go back to the browser and refresh, you can see count is equals to 1, and we don't see any more infinite loop. If I clear the refresh the, okay, so it's frozen for some reason. Let's just yes, so this is working. Now let's get back to our code, and inside of the use effect, let's print the word rendered again. If I now refresh the page, hit inspect, and then go back to the console, we can see the word rendered printed. But if I press the increment button, you can see the count state is increasing, the count state is changing, but we no longer get the word rendered printed. It is printed only once when the component first rendered. Though if we want to, we can get the word rendered printed when our count state changes. We can achieve this by making count a dependency of the use effect hook. So back in our code, first you have to delete this set count line, because otherwise it will cause a infinite loop. And inside the dependency, let's just put count. This means that whenever our count state changes, it will trigger the use effect hook. So when I change, let's refresh, and if I press increment now, you can see that we get the word rendered printed. I don't want this behavior, so I'm just going to revert this as it was before. Sometimes we may need to clean up a side effect. So back in the code, I want to increase the value of set count by 1 every 1 second. So how we may achieve this is that we can call a set interval, and inside we pass a callback function, and we specify a time that will be 1 second. So 1000 millisecond is actually 1 second, and set count should be inside of the set interval. So if I visit the browser again, you can see that the value of count is increasing by 1 every second. Now, if for some reason this changing states component unmounts, means that we're no longer showing it on the screen, this timer will keep on running, and it will keep on taking the user's resources on the hardware. So what we have to do is we have to clean up this interval. So it no longer, when our component is no longer mounted, it is no longer taking the resources of the user's hardware. How we may achieve this is that we can return something on the use effect, and let's just put this set interval inside a constant, and we're going to call this timer, and return a callback function on the use effect, and let's just clear interval, and let's pass timer. So what this will do is that when our component is no longer mounted, meaning that it's no longer on the UI, it will clean this timer up. Otherwise, our timer will keep on running indefinitely, which will take a lot of users' resources unnecessarily. That's it for this video. I will see you in the next one.